Hi everyone, my name's Zoe Grant. I'm from Jesuit Refugee Service Australia and I'm the community organizer there and I'll be your host for today. I want to welcome you to this webinar celebrating the 106th Migrant and Refugee Sunday. This year, Pope Francis has chosen to focus on the message of forced to flee like Jesus Christ, which we'll be exploring today. I'd first like to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the various lands on which we meet on today, and to pay my respect to elders past, present, and emerging. Please feel free to put in the chat where you're meeting from today, and I'm on Gadigal land of the Eora Nation. Please note we will be doing a Q&A at the end, so please put your questions in the Q&A box throughout the whole event, and we'll get through as many as we can. The message of this year's Migrant and Refugee Sunday originated in the experience of young Jesus and his family as displaced persons and refugees. This experience provides a reminder for the Christian action of welcome. Pope Francis reminds us that Jesus is present in each of them, who are forced to flee to save their life. In their faces, we are called to recognize the face of Christ. I want to now ask you as well to please put in the chat, what does being forced to flee like Jesus mean to you in today's context? Pope Francis also asks us to explore the following themes: to know in order to understand, to draw near as to serve, to listen in order to reconcile, to share and thus to grow, to involve in order to promote, and to collaborate and therefore to build. We hope that through this webinar, you're able to do all of this through learning about what's been happening to refugees in Australia, hearing someone's personal story, and to see how you can get involved. Tonight, we'll be hearing from Zaki Haidari, a community leader with lived experience, Nishadh, the Policy, Advocacy and Communications Manager at Jesuit Refugee Service Australia, from the social justice around the Bay members, Phil and Bill, as well as a local parishioner, Leo. So I'm just going to see what's been coming through the chat now, how everyone's going on what. If you want to add in there what being forced to flee like Jesus Christ means to you today in the current context. So we'll look at that throughout the night. I'd now like to invite Phil to join to share about social justice around the Bay. Hi, Phil. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Zoe. Good afternoon, everyone. Just to introduce you to SJ Around the Bay, or Social Justice Around the Bay. It's a network of parish social justice groups in the Diocese of Broken Bay, and we've been together as a network for about 11 years, following a meeting with Bishop David. We aim to support each other and to inform each other on actions for social justice and caring for the environment. And we try to be up to date on what advocacy needs there are at any point in time and enable a wider community involvement or involvement of our parishioners. So, for example, in recent times, Vinnie's and the Sydney Alliance have been seeking signatures for greater commitment from government on affordable housing. Earlier on, a year or so ago, the Sisters of St Joseph's were actively pursuing a fairer border between Australia and Timor-Leste. So we were able to respond to their advocacy initiatives. Oxfam, for example, has had a campaign to try and ensure fairer wages for garment workers in Bangladesh. So what we try to do is just stay abreast of various organisations and their activities, let parishioners know what little action they can take, and so build up that advocacy strength. So advocacy then is an important part of our work. Also supporting, or not so much supporting, but being able to give witness to the church and its involvement in these issues. We have, you might be able to see in the background there, we have a banner which is social justice around the Bay, and we've got messages that we can deliver to the public at rallies, for example, Palm Sunday rallies. Other rallies that we've attended have been to on environmental issues, and we, as you can see from the placards that we've got there, we've got 20 of those. We get volunteers to carry those. We've got, as you can see there, a T-shirt that we wear, again, trying to give witness to Christian values, to Catholic values and the Church's social teaching. We've got a website and people can log on to that, and we try and outline basic issues that are related to the Church's works, to the Church's social work. So we have a particular focus, of course, for the marginalised, those on the edge that need the support of people such as us, not just locally, but overseas as well. So that's about it. And I'll hand back now to Zoe.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Phil, for taking the time to share more about social justice around the Bay. It's been such a pleasure to work with the group and to see all the work that you do and the passion as well. I'd now like to invite Zaki Haidari to join as he shares his lived experience, starts the discussion on today's issues that we're going to be exploring.
Thank you, Zoe. My name is Zaki Haidari and I'm based in Canberra at the moment. I am originally from Afghanistan, from a Hazara ethnic group. I was forced to leave my home country back in 2012 when I was 17 years old, because of my religion, my ethnic group, and also because of my father's involvement with his work. So those were the main reasons that I had to leave my country, or I had to be sent to a safe place by through these smugglers, which was arranged by my mom. So today I'm just basically sharing, I guess, the reasons that I left my country and my experience being in Australia for over 8 years now. And you're welcome to ask any question that you have in mind or that comes through. I'm happy to answer any question that you have in mind. There's no question that shouldn't be asked. I will try my best to answer any question that you have. Going back to my home country, my ethnic group weren't allowed or didn't have their basic human rights, such as having access to education or having access to Medicare or any hospital before my father's generation. For example, my grandfather didn't have the rights to go to school or being a first-class citizen in Afghanistan. So my father was the first kind of generation who was allowed to go to school and being able to go to university, and his dream was to become a doctor. Because I am from Jesuit, which is near Kabul. It's 2 hours drive from Kabul, but it's mainly the place where my ethnic group lives. And due to that reasons, we didn't have any medical assistance or any hospital or medical center. So my father's passion was to go to university and study medical science to become a general practitioner, because before his medical center there wasn't any medical facility in hometown. So that was something that drive him to go to university. He did go through a lot of challenges going to school for as a first generation, being discriminated of his ethnic group and religion that he was practicing. And he was a brave man. He did manage to finish high school and go to university and become a doctor. He opened his medical center in our hometown, which he saved many lives. And people were very respectful of him. But deep down, the work he was doing wasn't very safe for him because it involved a lot of traveling, going backward and forward to Kabul, the capital of Afghanistan, to get his medicine, all the things that he needed for his medical center. And also, as a father, he had a dream to provide that opportunity for us, being his kids, to go to school and go to university in a country where being a student or being a doctor or being a professional is a crime. So his work was involved a lot of traveling, and we knew that it wasn't safe for him because Taliban are mostly active in most places in Afghanistan, and they have their own checkpoints. They stop people and they check their ID card and ask them what they do for work and where they live, all sort of question. He had been stopped by Taliban a few times, but luckily they didn't take him away, where back in 2012 or 2011, once he had all his documents with him. So Afghanistan is, again, not a developed country, so a lot of the medicine are imported from other countries, and things that he needed were mainly in English. So all his most of the documentation that he needed would have been provided by him in English, like things that he needed, the list of medicine and stuff like that. So when he was coming back from Kabul once with all his stuff and documents that he had with him, he was stopped by Taliban, and he was accused that he was working for international forces, like American and Australian, and he was taken away by the Taliban. Since then, we haven't heard from him. That's from 2011 to now. Normally when they take people away, they just brutally kill them overnight, or they just behead them on the road in front of other people, or brutally kill them overnight and leave the body on the road so the next day people can carry the body to their family. In my father's case, we haven't heard from him since then. We still don't know if he's alive or he has been killed by them. That was not the end of story for my family. As Afghanistan is a different country, when someone in family doing something wrong to someone else has to pay the price. And the price is normally a blood that someone has to go to them, or they will come and take someone, they kill them. And that's how they feel that the guilt is clean from the family, or the family is not guilty anymore. And because my older brother was also killed by Taliban, being a university student before my dad, so I was the oldest son in the family. So they were sending people and they were sending letters for me to go to them. But we knew if I did go, that was it for me. I would have been killed by them. So mom had to leave. We all had to leave the town. We had to move to Kabul for a few months. She tried to hide me, and she couldn't do that anymore. She decided to send me to a safe country, which wasn't easy for her because, again, being Hazara, there was a lot of discrimination for getting passport or getting around. She managed to get the passport, but then she soon realized that there is no safe country which would provide me visa to travel, which was very disappointing for her. And then she searched a lot, like she was searching for a safer way for me to travel to a safe country. At the end, she was very hopeless to a point where she found the people smugglers who could smuggle me out of Afghanistan to a safe country, which wasn't the best option. She came home one day full of tears, and she hugged me and she said, look, these people will take you to a safe country, but there is no guarantee that you will be safe or you will arrive to a safe country. So there's a very high risk that you will die on the way before getting to a safe country. And then she was saying that she didn't have any other choice or any decision to make or to keep me in Afghanistan. So that was the best kind of option for me to leave my home country at the age of 17 with this smuggler. Didn't know where I was going. Knowing that I'm going through a very risky journey, that I might end up dying halfway through before getting to a safe place. But I didn't have any choice to stay in Afghanistan or I would have been dead. So that's how my journey started. It was a long journey, full of craziness. I don't know how I made it. It took me about 3 months before I got into Australian shore. The whole journey is a very long story to tell, but there were a lot of time that I felt that I was dying. And there's a lot of time that I think it was pure luck that I survived before I got into Australian shore. And then when I got here, it was just an unfortunate time. I arrived in Christmas Island, or I was rescued by the Australian Navy and was taken to Christmas Island in November 2012, which then we were said that Australia has changed its policy to refugees or asylum seekers who are coming to Australia, which then meant that I wouldn't be given a permanent protection from Australian government, which only meant that I could be sent to Nauru or Mount Asylum, or I could be in detention center wherever. So that was the news that I got from the Australian immigration. And I was detained, and I was scared every day that when I will be deported to my home country or to one of those islands. I was detained for about 3 months, but I was lucky that I wasn't sent to Nauru or Mount Asylum. And I was given a bridging visa, which meant that I can live in community with no work rights or no access to education, which was very terrifying for me, being in Sydney with any of those rights, just stay home, forced to get Centrelink for 3 years. And I couldn't speak English very much. I had very basic English. And I was very lucky that I had a scholarship from one of the private college that I learned English and went on and did 2 diplomas before I was granted work right after 3 years. And when I had my work right, I started working full time. And then after a year, I was granted a TPV, a chef visa, which allows me to stay in Australia for another 5 years. So I have been in Australia for about 8 years now. I'm on a chef visa at the moment. I still don't know what will be future for me, but my visa is running out next year. And we will find out next year if I will be granted another TPV or I will be deported back to Afghanistan. So there's a lot to cover, I guess, but the 2 points that I'm trying to make is Afghanistan wasn't a safe place for me, and Australia has been safe for me in 2 different ways, I guess. Mentally, I'm not safe still. I'm on a temporary visa. I don't know what will happen next year when my visa runs out. But physically, in a way, I have been feel safe by the community, that I feel that I am part of a community where everyone sees you as a human being, not based on your race or religion. And the community has been supportive of me throughout my education and throughout my seeking employment. And I feel very lucky that I spent 2 years, 8 years in Australia, I guess. This has been, in a way, the worst time of my life, but also in another way, the best time of my life, because I have seen a lot of good people in Australia, and although if I be deported back to Afghanistan, at least I know that there are good people in the world. And if I do get deported back to Afghanistan, it will be end of my life, as Afghanistan is not going through a good circumstance at the moment, and it's not safe for Hazaras, and particularly for myself. My family is still living in hidden areas. They're not very public, because of my father and for me being here for almost 8 years. So if I do get deported back to Afghanistan, I feel that will be it for me. I will be killed one way or the other. So I'm hoping that I get another temporary visa, that I can live in Australia for another 5 years. At least that's what I'm hoping at the moment. I know that Australia has been very strongly on their point of not giving permanent protection for refugees and asylum seeker. So I guess that's me, and my time is getting over, but if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. Thanks, Zoe.
Zaki. Zaki, what an inspiration you are to all of us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for what you're doing in this country for us and living in such a repressive way. Not knowing whether you're going to be granted a further extension to the visa, not knowing what's happened to your family back in Afghanistan. It's beyond comprehension, but we thank you for sharing with us this afternoon.
No, thank you for having me.
I'd now like to introduce Rego, who is the Policy, Advocacy and Communications Manager for Jesuit Refugee Services. Good afternoon, Nish. How are you, Nish?
Hi, Bill. Hi, everyone.
I'm going to be putting a few questions to you, which I hope you might be able to give us a little overview of the work of GRS and of the status of your clients at this time. How important, Nish, is a human rights-based approach to managing COVID-19? And what's been the impact of the pandemic on the clients of JRS and the services you provide them with?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. Look, I just want to start again by acknowledging Zaki for sharing that with us. You know, it's always a privilege, Zaki, to hear from you, but also to work with you. Zaki is also a remarkable activist and advocate and leader in the community, and I've heard him speak very powerfully, including in Parliament. So thank you again, Zaki. But look, Phil, Bill, to your question, I think it's a really good question. I think the frame, the human rights frame here is really important, because for a long time, Australian governments have devised policy in this area on the assumed basis that it is necessary to curtail fundamental human rights of a particular cohort of non-citizens, that is people seeking asylum who've arrived by boat, like Zaki, and to do so in the service of this idea of the sovereign right to determine who can return, who can sort of enter into our territory and who cannot. And to that goal, Australia has created a quite elaborate suite of policies, as we all know, to prevent irregular migrants from departing countries of origin or transit, to intercept and interdict their vessels and indeed return them, to prevent them from applying for asylum in Australia, including by sending people offshore, to detain them indefinitely, and as in Zaki's case, to deny those who are already in Australia from obtaining permanent protection after they're found to be refugees. Now, this is despite the fact that the right to seek asylum is, of course, enshrined in the Refugees Convention. as is the idea of preventing states from discriminating against people based on their mode of arrival or whether they've had a valid visa at the time of arrival. These policies have been defended in the name of deterrence. So, to demonstrate to future would-be irregular migrants that Australia is not an inviting place. It is not a place where they would be welcomed if they didn't arrive without permission. But over time, the boats, talking about this policy, the boats have been stopped largely by the physical presence of Australia's Navy, right, intercepting and turning them back. And this really calls into question the efficacy of offshore detention and the policies such as the denial of permanent visas as a tool of deterrence. Robert Mann, the academic, has argued quite convincingly. He said, had the deterrent effect of locking up people on places like Manus and Nauru or denying people like Zaki permanent protection, had that deterrent effect been powerful, we wouldn't have had our Navy stopping the boats on our northern shores, right? But these policies, temporary protection visas, chevs, offshore processing, these policies continue despite the fact that they have very little relationship to that early logic of deterrence, right? And the point here is that they continue, I think, in part because we do not have a human rights architecture in this country. We do not think about human rights as a policy goal in and of itself. And people's lives are instrumentalized for some other goal. And so I think, the human rights approach is really important. And it's even more important in the context of the pandemic, where Parliament is not sitting regularly, where the executive is able to sort of call on extraordinary emergency powers without checks and balances. And in this moment, the human rights of people who are not citizens are also really important. So if I can describe briefly what we've been seeing at JRS, I guess to summarize it maybe in a sentence, is that people have lost employment. People want to work, but they've lost employment, like many others. But they have been unable to access any form of ongoing federal government support. So they do not have access. People seeking asylum, but others as well, do not have access to the JobKeeper and JobSeeker payments. And of course, they cannot return home, right? Either because their claims for protection have not been processed, or because they simply, if they're on other visas, they simply cannot get flights, they cannot afford flights, etc. And we, in terms of JRS, and this is the case for organizations across the board, we have seen a huge demand and increase for our services because people are in situations of homelessness, in situations of serious food insecurity. We've seen a 250% increase in demand for our service since April. We have had to provide food parcels to about 7,000 people since April. This is far beyond what we've done in the past. And the point I want to make here is that it is not sustainable for organizations, for charities like JRS, for parishes, for schools, for diaspora groups to be providing for people who have been left behind during the pandemic, who are not being given support, systemic support by the federal government. Temporary migrants, including people seeking asylum, people like Zaki, they've lived in the community, worked in the community, paid taxes in the community for years now. They're part of Australia's social contract, and it is incumbent on the government to support them at this point in time. I might leave it at that, Bill.
Thank you for that, Nish. Since 2012, according to the Refugee Council of Australia, a total of 4,183 people have been sent for offshore processing to Nauru and Papua New Guinea. Can you give us an overview of where these people are now? How many are still in Nauru, PNG, Australia, sent home and sent elsewhere?
Yeah, so there are approximately of the 4,000, approximately 4,200 people who were sent offshore in August, starting August 2012. Approximately 2,060, 2,100 are in Australia today. This includes people who were sent offshore in between August 2012 and July 2013, when Kevin Rudd announced that no one in that group would ever be resettled in Australia. Some of those people came back to Australia during that time, and others remained offshore. So of the 2,063, about 1,220 have since July 2013 been transferred back to Australia for medical treatment. Now that is both under the Medivac process, but also outside of it. About 950 people have been returned to countries of origin. About 830 odd have been resettled elsewhere, the majority to the United States. There are about 270 people who are in Australia at the moment who are going through the US resettlement process. And there are about 180 people a piece, I suppose, in Port Moresby, mainly in PNG, and another 180 in Nauru to this date. So yeah, that's kind of, and of the people who are in Australia, of that 2,060 odd people, people in a mix of situations, either in closed detention, in community detention, or in the community on sort of short-term bridging visas. And one point to make here is that of those in this cohort who are in Australia, they do not have the right to apply for visas here, and they can be returned under Australian law back to Manus or Nauru at any time, although that hasn't really been exercised in practice. I might leave it at that.
Thanks, Nish. Given how strongly Tony Abbott's mantra, "Stop the boats," resonated with the Australian voting population, do you recognise any positive changes in the attitudes of Australians towards refugees and displaced persons and asylum seekers?
I think this is it's a challenging question. It's hard to measure public attitudes, I think, towards forced migrants as a whole. A lot depends on who you're talking about exactly, how you're framing the questions, how you interpret the responses. And I think it's also important to flag that positive attitudes do not necessarily translate into voting outcomes, particularly on this issue. We've seen in past elections that even those who are supportive, and there's data that shows this, those who are supportive of refugees do not necessarily vote on that basis, as in there are other issues that are more important. I would say a couple of things. I've seen a couple of things. The first is that the discourse, the political discourse on asylum has changed since 2013, 2014. Now, at the time, "Stop the Boats" was a political slogan we were hearing every day. But then when the Abbott government got into power, it became a policy goal. And the irony is that once that goal was achieved, once the boats were stopped, there was no longer the same political narrative that could be spun in public. And I think since then, the public discourse on the question of offshore detention has changed, and a whole range of actors in Australian society, doctors, lawyers, civil society, etc., have been very effective in shifting the focus to actually the life-threatening consequences of the policy on people's lives, and particular children. We saw that with the getting children off Nauru. But the last point I'd make is that the impacts of the pandemic on over 1 million temporary visa holders in Australia has brought together a much broader chorus of voices across society in support of those who are not citizens. And that includes people seeking asylum. And we're hearing from businesses, we're hearing from unions, from people in academia. And this is really positive. But in particular, I think since April, the response of the Catholic Church, that's at grassroots level, in dioceses, amongst schools, and amongst leaders, that is bishops, CEOs, heads of congregation, has been really heartening. There's been a lot of public comment on the need to treat people with temporary visa holders with dignity. There's been a lot of representation made to our political leadership, and that's something that I haven't seen personally for a while. So that's, yeah.
Thanks, Nish. The 6 sub-themes promoted by Pope Francis for this day are: to know in order to understand, to draw near so as to serve, to listen in order to reconcile, to share and thus grow, to involve in order to promote, to collaborate and therefore to build. How best can we affect these in our society?
Yeah, again, I mean, there's a lot in those 6 pairs of verbs that Pope Francis has articulated in his statement. I suppose there's a couple of things here. For me, one of the most important, and for JRS, I suppose, is how do we build a culture of encounter with people whose lives have been affected by these policies or who are forcibly displaced. And I think we need to be quite intentional and proactive about hosting events like this, about hearing from leaders like Zaki. But I think we also need to go perhaps beyond our own local geographies and our own sort of cultural comfort zones in order to really engage with people or who have had these experiences. So, I invite you to come out to JRS, for example, in Western Sydney, but to volunteer, for example, to join perhaps a broad-based group like the Sydney Alliance, where there is remarkable work being done by international students who have been left behind during the pandemic. The other point, which relates to Pope Francis's comment about listening in order to reconcile, is how do we partner rather than serve? How do we meet diaspora leaders and communities on their own terms and facilitate platforms for them to self-represent rather than us speaking on their behalf? And I think one very concrete way to do this is to ensure that when we're hosting events, when we're meeting a politician, when we're organizing an activity, that we always involve a leader or a community who has been affected. And the last point that I'd make, which is in relation to collaborating and therefore building, is, and there's a comment from Pope Francis in there in which he says, the pandemic has reminded us that we are all in the same boat. Realizing that we have the same concerns and fears has shown us once more that no one can be saved alone. And I think, the pandemic is a perfect opportunity to show us that we're all sort of in this together. But also, I would say the bushfires, for example, demonstrated that Australians are not immune from the causes of forced displacement. I mean, there were a number of people who were, in effect, internally displaced as a result of the bushfires, and we have to keep that in mind for the future. I might leave it at that.
Thank you so much, Nish. I'll hand back to Zoe.
Thank you so much, Nish and Bill. That was really fantastic to really hear a lot more about the issue and to go in depth with the theme as well. So thank you so much for your time. So I'm now going to share some of the actions that you can take to be part of the change. So Nish was great in kind of exploring some of those already. And it's great to see so many people here tonight, because with the amount of people we have tuning in right now, imagine if we all took action, the change that we could do together. So we're going to send some more information in the coming days, but here are a few things you could do. You could join a Catholics for a Refugee group to take action on issues that we've learned about tonight. So these are groups starting in different areas, there to empower you and support you in action you want to take. You could also do a food drive, meet with your local MPs to talk about this issue, running events like this webinar. Imagine if we had these happening everywhere, and reaching out to as many people as we can. You could even, with that, we'll be sending you the recording of this webinar so you could share that with friends and family. And you can also join different events happening around the country now, since everything's online. For change to occur, it's really important that we keep this issue in the forefront of our community and our government. So we need all of you to make this happen. Now, before we go to the next part, I just want to remind you to please put your questions in the chat function. I've seen some really, really beautiful comments coming through in support of what's been happening and of Zaki's story. Thank you so much for all that love and encouragement for him. If you could make sure that when you put your comments to panelists and attendees, and then everyone can see where we're all at. I'd now like to invite Leo and Phil to join, where Leo's going to share what it was like for him in his parish when he took actions to support people seeking asylum during this crisis. Thank you, Phil and Leo.
Oh, hi there, Leo. Well, you and I are in the one parish, but you responded to the difficulties facing refugees. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Well, sure. I was enlightened by yourself and JRS for a start as to the extremity of the need of people getting no government support. Astonished that the federal government had decided to discard all those people, probably 60,000 or more, somebody may have more exact figures, that get no federal government support. They're unemployed, they can't get Medicare, they can't get any assistance. So they rely on people like JRS for support, for sustenance, to pay the rent. So the obvious thing to do is, well, turn to the parish. Now, we all do the thoughts and prayers thing, but you need a bit more than thoughts and prayers when people are hungry. So turning to a lot of the people that I know in the parish, I said, well, we should form a group to get food collected. So my house and garage were a food collection point. And, you know, in response to the JRS appeal, because they distribute in excess of 850 meals every week to people who rely on handouts. And you see, this is one of the tragedies, that the authorities are washing their hands. The people on temporary refugee visas fall through the cracks. So we have to alert. This is where SJ are on the bay again, alerting the community to the needs. But people at the grassroots level where we are, they're wonderful. And they responded, you know, with great support, was able to collect, you know, 3 trailer loads of non-perishable food and toiletries and transport them out to Western Sydney, to Westmead, where JRS have a food packing and distribution centre. And, you know, again, the people from French's Forest Parish have been fabulous, but it extended far beyond that, Phil, as you know. It went, the people on social media, it went, you know, many kilometres, double the size of the parish. People active through social media, people that had connections with the Jesuits over the years or went to the schools. The people at the grassroots level are fantastic. Now, somehow we have to muster that energy and move it to the next level where we can actually get the authorities to take on board their duties and obligations in caring for these people who are falling through the cracks. Now, I might just also say, Phil, that going out to the centre at Westmead to see all the volunteers in action there, it was just fabulous. I was out one day first by myself and then with somebody else the second day. And like I said, we had 3 trailer loads of materials to bring. And all these bodies came from inside and they were all unloading, you know, goods. It was just fantastic, the spirit that is out there. I was also privileged to see all the packing that they had done to, you know, get the food items out to the 850 people that live off their support every week. So a fantastic level of generosity at the grassroots level, at the parish level. But now the challenge is, how are we going to take it to the next level?
Well, that was really, that's a really introduction to my next question, because it was this, where do you see the issue going in the long term? Because, you know, we've still got those 180 in PNG, 180 on Nauru, and we've got people more or less imprisoned, even down in Melbourne. So, you know, how do we respond to that? What's our next step there?
Well, this is at a level much higher than us. So we have to take it to the people who are responsible, Phil. That is the politicians. And we have to network. Now, some of us, including yourself, have already been to see our local member of parliament to emphasize the terrible, dire circumstances that these people are living in. Again, like the people who have fallen through the cracks. And we just can't turn the blind eye. JRS or St. Vincent de Paul cannot do those things. We need to take it to the politicians, tell them that there is a grassroots movement of people down here who actually want action. We don't want lip service anymore. We want real action. Galvanize small groups to perhaps work in conjunction with bigger groups, and we lobby our politicians locally, statewide, nationwide. The sky is the limit. We have this power if only we learn how to harness it and use it. And that's by collectively doing things.
Right, so you're saying that, or would you be suggesting that we might have a particular campaign that a whole group of networks sort of focus on a particular thing, like allowing the refugees to go to New Zealand, for example, or freeing the family that's on Christmas Island? Do you think we could sort of just together as a kind of network of networks focus on the one thing, perhaps at a national level or something like that?
Well, I think we have to impress the politicians in a way that there is genuine concern out there, that we really have to put this refugee question to bed forever. Like, keeping these people in limbo is just absolutely cruel. It's inhumane. The politicians have been criticized by, you know, the various international authorities. We're not doing Australia's reputation any good. We are dragging it through the mud by stooping so low. Let's reach higher, let's aim higher, but politicians only listen to numbers. So we do have to organize. We do have to form groups, network to network. And I think if everybody that we contact could say, perhaps get another 10 people, and then another network get a similar expansion, where we connect all these networks and lobby our politicians, like I've already said. We have it in our power to do this. We can do it, but we need action. We can't sit on our laurels. We have to move.
Thanks, Leo. Well, I'll hand back now to Zoe.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Leo. That was so encouraging to hear what you've been doing and how you've been involved. And I've loved your passion since the first day I met you. And it was really exciting for us at JRS as well to see that food come in and see all those photos come in and hearing from different staff members unpacking it. They were so excited, so thrilled. It makes a really big difference because we're feeding over 820 people a week right now, when before COVID it was 200 people. So there's a lot of need, and we are so encouraged and inspired by the work that you're doing. So we're now going to go to our Q&A section. We've had a few questions come through, which is great. I invite anyone back to the screen who wants to be part of this section to answer all the questions. It would be wonderful to have you join. Fantastic. Thanks everyone for joining back. So I'll start with, someone wants to ask, they're asking Nish, do you draw a distinction between people who seek refuge as asylum seekers and those who come as economic migrants?
So the term refugee and person seeking asylum has a place in international law, and there's a definition. There's a clear definition of a refugee within the Refugees Convention. A person seeking asylum is someone who is staking a claim for protection. In JRS's context, we serve people who are in need. That is the primary kind of determination of who we support. And I would say that in the context of the pandemic, many of these categories, which have legacy in international law and in some national laws and policies, have been broken down, because the fact is that about 1.4 temporary visa holders, that includes people seeking asylum, refugees, international students, working holiday makers, people who have come on skilled visas, all of whom are here. They have the right to be here. They have been in the community for a long time. All of those people have been left behind in terms of federal government support. So we are trying to support whoever is in need in this particular context. So I might leave it at that. I mean, it's a much longer conversation to have, but people migrate for all kinds of reasons, and often the distinction in practice between someone fleeing persecution, between someone fleeing generalized conflict and natural disasters and poverty and chronic insecurity, those are all part of the picture for people. So yeah, I mean, that's not the clearest answer in the world, but it's not a clear issue, I don't think.
Thanks, Nish. This one's for Zaki. Are there any documentation of those who are forced to return to the place of origin, who lost their lives, were in prison, say in the last 5 years? If we do, how can we use that information to be how could those information to be used ethically to raise consciousness in advocacy?
I mean, I can't speak on behalf of every community or people who are coming to Australia from different countries, but I can speak about Hazaras. So back in I can't remember exactly the year, I think it was 2016, when a Hazara man was deported from Australia of being rejected his claim for seeking asylum. And he was caught by Taliban, and he was brutally beaten up, and somehow he managed to escape. That was all that we heard. And after that, we still don't know if he managed to escape out of Afghanistan or he was caught back by Taliban. So that was all in media, and after that, we didn't hear back from him. But again, it comes down to individual cases and the reasons that they are leaving country. But being as a man deported back to Afghanistan, I can assure you that it's a very risky place to be deported. First, because we don't have a place in Afghanistan. The reasons of our ethnic group. So for me, we're a very minority ethnic group in Afghanistan. So it's very easy for Taliban to identify me because I look more Asian, where the majority people look more like Middle Eastern. So it's very easy to identify me being Hazara, and especially being deported from a Western country. We cannot travel anywhere in Afghanistan. We cannot, it's just not safe for people like me because Taliban are very powerful and has been powerful, and they're getting more powerful now, joining the Afghan government, so which will leave a very small place for my ethnic group to live in that environment. So it's a tricky question, I guess. Like I don't have any facts and proven document, but all I can say is if we do get deported, that will be it for us, and we have witnessed that people have been taken back by Taliban.
Thank you for sharing that. Got another question, and I'll send it to Leo, Phil, and Bill, whoever would like to respond. Would approaching our local member of parliament in our communities be a good way to start? The federal elections are coming up, and perhaps our local communities can voice it through SJ around the Bay to an MP.
Well, yes, I'll answer that or respond to it. Already alluded to it that we met our local representative, Jason Felinski. Phil was with me, and Nish, and he's very sympathetic to what the issues are. He understands, and he empathizes, and he will support in various ways. So that is the start. Now, the extension of that is that we get one MP who is sympathetic and favorable, and we impress on them about getting other MPs of similar thought processes so that they form a group within Parliament themselves, so it mushrooms. You see, it's all about keeping the pressure on and the numbers up. But absolutely, going to your MP with a delegation, that's the way to do it. That's where the power lies. That's what we have to attack.
And it is a creaky door policy. So the more you creak, the more effect you'll have. At the moment, I'm going to be part of one next week with Sydney Alliance Group to see Julie and Lisa. Now, I have written several letters to Julie and Lisa on the subject of refugees and the visa holders and the fact that the government is doing very little for them economically. I get the stock mantra back every time. I'm sure most of it comes from an underling and not from Mr. Lisa himself, but that's common. But again, you've just got to keep at it and at it. And I know Vinnies are doing this as well. So as many groups as possible that can need to go to their local member.
And can I just add to that? What I would suggest too is we try perhaps to actually form a network of networks so that I know Anne's mentioned and Lanyon has mentioned in the chat room that the Josephite sisters have got righting rings for righting wrongs. Now, if we can extend that kind of network and the strategy that we have in SJ around the Bay, if we could widen that, not just to within the Broken Bay Diocese or the 3 Sydney dioceses, but at a national level. And I understand that the Jesuits have communications with their parishes and their national. And what I would invite anybody who's listening to today's webinar to do would be to indicate in the chat room their name and their contact details, and if it was feasible, we could explore the whole notion of creating a network of networks to see if this was possible on a national level, so that these groups would not only be Catholics for Refugees, but they would be, you know, active in other areas as well. It's a matter of knowing that there are these people out there who would be willing to go to their politicians or willing to write. If we know who they are, if we can be a little bit more organised, I think we could be much, much more effective.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for those answers. And we'll have our last question. Someone asks, I'd like to know how we can help Zaki and others like him, starting with Australian policy. I'll leave that to Zaki and Nish.
Nish, do you want to go first? Oh.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to keep engaging with our decision makers, and in the current context, it is important that we engage the decision makers that represent us in our local electorates, and as much as that can happen across Australia, common messages get heard, common experiences and stories like Zaki's get heard, and those then get taken into discussions in Parliament. That seems to be the only way to slowly start shifting the policy perspectives, especially in this issue area, because these issues have been politicized for so long, and really they're not issues of politics, they're issues of human decency, really. And you know, as much as people like Zaki yourself, Zaki, can articulate your perspectives and your experiences directly to politicians, it's not that they should hear solely or even at all from people like myself or Leo or Phil or Bill. I think it's much more powerful, or equally powerful. So that's something that we're trying to do at JRS, is to work with people like Zaki, work with the Hazara community to ensure that they're there in Parliament directly, and speaking to decision makers.
Yeah, I completely agree with Nish. I mean, and what I can add to that is, it's a topic about humans, right? Like, I have been away from my family for over 8 years. I know fathers who've been away for their kids for 10 years without seeing their kids grown up, without being able to travel to spend time with their family. We can't bring them here on a temporary visa. We have to have a permanent protection to be able to bring our loved one who are still in a war zone to join us to live as a family. So the whole situation is really, it's not a human way of keeping people away from their loved ones and keeping them in a limbo of not knowing how long do we have to survive. I think if we can make the message in a way to picture themselves, politicians or us, in a way that how would you feel of being away from your young child for 10 years, a child that you live back in a war zone that has been grown up and now she or he is 10 years old? Or how would you feel if you were away from your wife for over 10 years? Knowing that your wife is in a war zone, knowing that they will be killed or they will be in a bomb blast at any moment, because that's what the situation is in Afghanistan. My sibling goes out every day without knowing if they can return back home in the evening, or when my mom go out, when she goes out to buy grocery and stuff, she wouldn't know if she can make it home back. So our family is living in that kind of situation, and we are living in Australia, a country which we think human rights matters. And I think still a lot of the rights has been taken away from us. So I think if we can make it that in a way that can relate to them, that we are also human as the politicians who are making these decisions, I think that will be powerful. And I'm happy to get involved in any way that you need me, and anything that I can be a part of, I'm happy to get involved. So that's my message, I guess.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to Zaki and Nish and Bill and Phil and Leo for sharing tonight. It's been really great to hear about this area from so many different angles, from people who've been through it themselves, people working on a policy level, people working within their communities, and people also supporting on many different levels, including, you know, supporting with material goods. So I really appreciate all the speakers for being able to share tonight. And thank you so much for those who are attending. It's been so lovely having you part of this, and we really appreciate all the comments and all the support that's come through. It's really wonderful to see so many different parishes and people interested in being part of a network to help make a change in this area. So we'll be sending an email in the next couple of days with more information about how to be part of this, as well as the recording. And thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. We hope everyone has a great Migrant and Refugee Sunday.